Oh, hello, hello. We are live, or at least I hope we are. If you are joining live, let me know in the comments so that I can actually see you. But welcome for those who are joining on their lunchtime, maybe in the UK or in Europe, or this area of the world. This session is all about how to engage and retain top talent, and I am sharing, the secret ingredient of motivation. So all of this comes out of a recent paper that I have written called Levers to Leaders. So if you haven't already look at the paper, then feel free to download it after this and dive in. But really what we are doing in this session is bringing that paper to life. And that paper was looking really at the real reason why so many people are quitting, and how businesses and teams and leaders can help their people not only stay, but stay and thrive. And so we are diving beneath some of the external things that are being suggested. For instance, money is coming up a lot in terms of reasons why people are saying that they're leaving. And many organizations are revisiting their remuneration packages as an example to try and retain talent and attract talent actually too. What we're going to dive into in this session is a bit more of a deeper understanding of the real reason beneath that, beyond just money. My aim of the session is to save you time. So if you're watching this back on the replay, you might want to watch it at speed. That's what I certainly do when I enjoy watching recorded sessions. That's probably not the healthiest thing to do, but it's definitely available for you. But really, this is regardless of how the speed of which you watch this session, there is so much research that has gone into sharing what I'm about to share with you today. So I have read all of the papers, not all of the papers, but I've read a lot of papers. I've listened to a lot of podcasts. I've done a lot of thinking and reflecting and condensing it into an hour-long session for you to absorb and understand, well, what might really be the answer here, and what might be some solutions that we or I can try, both as individually to enhance our own motivation, but also if you are an HR leader, if you're a leader of a team, a wellbeing lead, or in any organization supporting any other people, this hopefully will provide some solutions for you to take back and enhance the motivation within your team. So that's a bit of a setup. My intention today is to provide a bit of a different perspective. So this photo is from a recent trip to Slovenia. I went there over the summer, and I decided to take this photo because I was wearing these glasses, which I called them my rose-tinted glasses. And I was just showing my partner the difference in perspective just by looking through a different lens. So my intention of today's session is really to provide a different lens or a different focus on a very similar challenge, or a common challenge that I am hearing throughout the many organizations that I'm speaking with, which is around people are quitting. People are quitting both physically with the Great Resignation, and there's been a huge amount of media around that, but also with the more recent phenomenon, which maybe isn't such a recent phenomenon, but it's certainly been covered a lot more recently, around quiet quitting. So we're going to dive into both of those challenges and offer some solutions around how you can support your people to not only stay, not only retain them, but support them to thrive wherever they are. A little bit about me. Hello. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm Chloe Temple, and oh gosh, if I was to draw a thread throughout my career, I would describe myself as a connector. I help people and businesses and individuals to connect the dots. I would consider myself a strategist. Certainly that seems to be the theme that has run throughout my career history. the majority of my time has been spent in FMCG and retail. I absolutely love those industries, in buying, and most recently heading up the category strategy team at a big pharmaceutical company. But then I changed direction into coaching, facilitating. I founded POP, which you can see here, stands for Pool of Potential Provides, and really is an access to help people dive into the potential that's within them as individuals, but also them as organizations and teams. I'm also a mental health first aider, a mental health champion for various personal reasons. I think it's incredibly important. But my mission is to help 1,000,001 people dive into their unique pool of potential. And the way that I go about doing that is by helping leaders create cultures of fulfillment where every single person can thrive. And it really comes from that personal experience, well, our personal experience of a decade of depression, actually slightly more than that, and realizing just how much, when I came out of that, realizing just how much I had within me and how much every single person has within them to dive into if they only have the tools and the support to help them get there. And when you do, you can achieve, experience, enjoy the world in just such a different way. So for me, it's around fulfillment, lasting happiness, because happy people, as we'll talk about later, produce unbelievable results and experience joy in the world. So I'm going to start by reflecting a little bit on what I see is going on in the world right now, the state of the workforce. So I don't know how you would describe it, but I personally think that the workforce is in strife. Certainly from a well-being perspective, we know from lots and lots of data that well-being is the worst that it's ever been on record. It's probably not surprising given what we've been through collectively over the last 3 years. But as I cover in a little bit more detail in the paper, there are some really startling stats that bring this to life. So 70% of people worldwide would either self-describe themselves as struggling or suffering. And that's according to a recent study by Gallup. 39% would describe themselves as overworked. 39% would describe themselves as feeling exhausted, and 54%, so over half, would describe themselves as feeling overworked. And that's by a recent Microsoft Work Trends study. And almost 80% of people, according to a study by Mercer, were experiencing some form of mental health challenge or burnout. Again, self-described. They might be more burning out. And of those up to 80% who described themselves as experiencing that challenge, over 80% of them said that it was affecting how they were showing up at work. And their daily work had been interrupted by those challenges. The other thing that's going on as well as us being in strife and probably not okay, what we're seeing is that people are voting with both their feet and their mind. So again, from the study by Microsoft Work Trends study, showed that 41% of people in 2021 were considering leaving. Huge. Almost half of people were considering leaving their organization. Actually, when we look at the actuals from 2021, in many countries, it was almost half of that amount. Huge number of people leaving and shifting elsewhere. A recent study by McKinsey was looking at, I think it was 65% of people who have actually left have actually shifted into a different industry. So really, really interesting stats going in terms of movement of labour. But whether or not people are physically leaving, there is a huge number who are struggling, and therefore, if not physically, they're thinking about it. What is being blamed is money. Most conversations that I have with businesses, there'll be some level of discussion around, well, people are leaving because they can get more money elsewhere, and we're simply not able to retain them because we're not able to match that salary, as an example, that they're being offered. Most exit interviews, one of the key kind of, it's an easy excuse at an exit interview to say, well, I got more money elsewhere. Few are actually really willing to dive into some of the deeper things that might be there. And also, we might not necessarily know it. So what I'm going to propose is, yes, money might play a part, but I think that there's a deeper reason, and that's what we're going to explore today. So early this year, I set out to have 100 conversations, 100 coffees. In fact, I've had so many coffees now that I've gone decaf, and I've got a trip next week to go to Australia. So I'm wondering how I'm going to go with the decaf there. But I set out to have a lot of conversations to actually understand, well, what are some of the challenges that HR are experiencing, that team leads are experiencing, people managing people who are responsible for people are experiencing. And there were three kind of key themes that came up. I'm going to explore some of those themes. So the first problem that I heard was this consensus that we're constantly fighting. We're fighting fire after fire. We are so enormously busy collectively, and there's heaps of data that goes on to show how that evidence that that's true in terms of the number of meetings that we're having now virtually, many of us, the hours that we're working or have been, and the amount of challenges and work we're doing. We're busier than ever. There's much more uncertainty than there ever has been across all different aspects. So political, financial, social, emotional. From a health perspective, there's been huge amounts of uncertainty there. And that's mounted and mounted and mounted within people, that we are just constantly looking for, we're constantly on high alert, right? I'll go back to that previous challenge that I've put there, but we're constantly on high alert. And that behavior and pattern of being on high alert is essentially meaning that we are, because it's become almost within our systems, as in it's become our normal to operate. If you're familiar with Stephen Covey's urgent, important matrix, that might really help. So if you imagine a matrix that looks like this, so you've got important at the top, not important down here, and then you've got urgent over here, not urgent over here. The box that we're spending the most amount of time is that important, urgent box. And with the pandemic, it is unbelievable what people were able to do, but there was just we were living in that urgent and important box. We were fighting fire, putting out fires here and there. The amount of the entrepreneurship that went on within that period, the amount of upheavals that it caused, the entire industries having to shift to working from home, everything felt urgent and important. What has meant, though, is we are running on that adrenaline. And for many, it's meant that we're no longer able to differentiate what's less urgent and what's less important. Than everything's feeling like it's in that top box. And that's putting a lot of sending our nervous systems into constantly feeling on high alert. And so if we reflect back on the point that I missed over, which is around our resources are being stretched to breaking point. Yes, our physical resources are being stretched to breaking point. Our mental resources are being stretched to breaking point. And, our people resources as well. We know that there's many gaps within teams, and we're therefore needing to fill those gaps, or raise our own productivity to kind of put on the different hat of the person who's not there. So, and from a financial perspective, we also feel like we're being stretched. What I'm also hearing is that when one fire is put out, it feels like the next one is just around the corner. So we're again on this high alert, waiting for the next problem or challenge that's going to come up. And we are, as a result of being in that reactivity, we are struggling to make time or find time for the more strategic stuff, for the more proactive stuff. The box that we really want to be in is actually this one. So the important but not necessarily urgent box. If you're familiar with the concept of being on the balcony rather than on the dance floor, that would be an example of that. And what I'm hearing is that people are just like, I don't have time to go on the balcony. I'm just on the dance floor, fighting the fire and putting them out. And I know that when one goes out, when I put one out, the next one's going to be around the corner. That was problem number one. Let me know in the chat if you think that that's relevant or it's, if it's resonating. The second problem that I'm hearing a lot of is the fact that we're not okay. Our people, and I've covered a little bit in terms of the stats already, but our people are not okay. And they're struggling. But it's not only our people who are not okay, actually we as leaders too ourselves are struggling. There's a stat here that I'm going to read because I don't want to forget it, but according to a recent Culture Amp survey, only 34% of HR professionals feel able to switch off from work to make time for rest. Whew. That is a really concerning stat. And only 43% feel that their stress levels are manageable. So the people who are trying to put out these fires as well, people who are trying to fill the gaps that have popped up within the teams are struggling themselves. We are struggling ourselves. Collectively, we are in the struggle. And as a result, we're exhausted. And just this morning, I had a conversation with a client saying, am I at burnout? Like, what does burnout feel like? I feel like I'm burning out. Am I? Lots, what we saw back to that Mercer study, the 80% of experience. It's like, well, possibly, yes. What we don't want to go down to is the burnout. Well, we're unable to actually function and do anything, right? We want to stay, we want to avoid the burning out. We're not going to function at our best when we are burning out. And this exhaustion is becoming the norm. And we're trying our best, right? But, and this is what, proverbial whisper to me over Zoom. We're not convinced we have the answers. And I was listening to a recent Deathly podcast with Simon Sinek and Brené Brown, and both commented this whole theme came up as the overall theme of what Brené Brown, Simon Sinek, and Adam Grant were experiencing or seeing in organizations that they work with. The concept of people are just not okay. And Brené talked about the fact that it's the great awkward. We're in the great awkward. And Simon talks about the fact we need to get comfortable with not having the answers right now because it's in a state of flux, in a state of confusion. We don't have necessarily the answers. And so that's one of the key challenges that people are experiencing. and we don't know what's coming around the corner. And that keeps us in that state of high alert. So that might have resonated, that problem number 2. Problem number 3 is all around retention and engagement. So we know that churn has been unprecedentedly high in organizations. You only have to go to a restaurant to see some of the challenges and short staffing that is predominant everywhere. And it's feeling really hard to fill vacancies, feeling impossible. And there are a lot of gaps within teams, and that is creating even more pressure on teams to respond and to fill gaps, particularly when a lot of businesses right now, when we enter the recession, or we're entering the recession, are pulling back and hiring freezes are going down, and people are concerned, talking about engage and retaining of your people. They're worried that this is what it's going to look like, and it feels like there's no end in sight for people when they're already stretched. There's pressure on leaders and on HR departments to fill the roles as fast as they can do, to resource up teams who are already experiencing a lot of pressure, simply not necessarily the supply, which had experienced the lowest unemployment rates ever, certainly in the UK. And it's also more difficult to find candidates who are willing to do it, or we're having to offer more money for the same level of candidate. Previously, we wouldn't have necessarily had to. We're fighting harder to get the same level of talent. And it's not only external who are asking for more money, internally too. We're being pressed. People are experiencing cost of living crisis or cost of living increases, and therefore understandably are asking for more money themselves. But not all businesses are going to be able to stretch their budgets to meet that increased demand for higher salaries, or give people what they want. So all of that is meaning that there's never really been a more critical time to retain and engage talent, and the role of the leader in that is incredibly important. Whew, it's quite heavy. I'm going to shift out a bit of that emotion. So there's a lot that's going on. Those are the kind of 3 key problems that I have noted through all of those conversations that I've had. I'd love to hear, leave in the comments what have I missed, what else, or does that resonate with what you are seeing or experiencing? And for the latter part, we're going to start talking about get deeper into some of the key drivers behind this and offer some solutions. And I'm going to pose 5 different questions, the first starting with, what percentage of your team would you describe as thriving or surviving? And here on the slide, I've got a little picture of anything above the line I would describe as thriving, and you can replace that with whatever words that feel most relevant for you. But if we are thriving, we're starting to flourish, we're flourishing and thriving. This is when people are performing at their best. They're enjoying life, they're performing at their best, they're thriving. So how many people, or what percentage of your team do you think are above that line there? And then comparatively, what percentage do you think are below? So when I say out, I mean burning out, checking out, burnt out at worst, or struggling or sustaining, just hanging on in there. That's what I would call surviving. They're just surviving. They're certainly not thriving, they're surviving. What percentage do you think your team are at? Now, as well as all of the conversations and 100 coffees that I've managed to have, I also get to have the distinct privilege of having conversations like these, coaching one-on-one as part of the groups, the group coaching programs that I run, conversations with the teams, that I support through the workshops that I do, and actually get under the skin of, well, what actually is going on. We hope that it looks like a Wi-Fi model and it's top heavy and most people are thriving. But the reality is, my observation certainly, and stats probably do back it up, is that a frightening number of people are I've described as out, not in. They're in that survive. And that Wi-Fi model actually needs to be turned on its head if we were to truly think that that was to represent how people are actually doing. And we know from having gone through, having relied so heavily on technology now, that when your Wi-Fi is down, and the last time I ran this session, I had some Wi-Fi issues. I actually ended up having to leave the call and redial in because my Wi-Fi was just not working. Well, when we are not functioning, right? Back to this. We can't function. So the same is true of our well-being, our health, our vitality, our motivation. When we're in those lower aspects, we're going to really struggle to show up and deliver for ourselves and for the businesses that we support in the way that we want. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. So this is from a Microsoft Trends survey, and it was looking at the top 5 reasons why people are quitting. As I say, from the conversations I've had, a lot of people are like, Chloe, it's money. People are living for money. We can't retain them because of money. And I'm like, well, is it really money? These are the top 5 reasons, and spoiler alert, none of them include money. Personal well-being and mental health, work-life balance, risk of getting COVID, probably a little bit less relevant. This is 2021 data. Lack of confidence in the senior management and leadership, and a lack of flexibility and flexible working hours and location. So the desire for flexibility. At number 7 was not receiving promotions or raises. So in terms of the priority there, it really is around kind of health, well-being, leadership, and flexibility. It's not about the money. So this is a number when I was away on my holiday taking photos and through my sunglasses. I was asked a question by my partner's sister, and said, well, what's the consistent theme from the conversations and the people that you've been working? What's the consistent theme there that's been running throughout? Actually, I thought about it and thought, oh, well, actually, most people will come to work with me because they are desiring at some level to quit or leave their job, or essentially leave their job. And when she asked that question, and I realized that, I went back into the data and actually looked at, well, what was the number? And this was the number. 85% of people who I have worked with over the last however long were coming to me because they wanted to leave and do something else, essentially. You want to know the number who actually have? 0. See, what we learn from that, what I learned from that, is it's not really about the money. There's some deeper drivers behind why people think that they want to leave or change or do something different. And that's what we're going to explore here. So would you like to understand the real driver behind why so many people are leaving? I'm going to assume that's a yes. If you know, then you can stop watching now, don't worry. So the real problem is actually a failure in motivation, hence why the title of this session was all around the secret of motivation. What we are experiencing and seeing is a failure in motivation. So for those of you who are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, he talks about kind of 5 different hierarchies of needs. At the base level of our needs are the physiological. So that's kind of air, food, water, shelter, right? Slightly higher up than from that is safety, and this could be physical or biological safety needs. And this is where the pandemic really hit us. A lot of us didn't feel safe, physically safe. COVID took us down in terms of those needs and made us reprioritize and rethink and feel less safe, essentially. The other thing that COVID did was really highlight the importance of that third need, the sense of love and belonging. A lot of us were disconnected from, but forced to disconnect from our loved ones physically. I was across many, many seas to be able to get to mine. And so that's the third. The third order need is love and belonging. I'm going to take some water. And the fourth is esteem. So this one used to historically be very, very, very important to people, or considered really important. This is around esteem, where esteem is kind of extrinsic rewards, money, status, power would be all fall within the esteem. And the top level is self-actualization. So that would be kind of personal growth, meaning, purpose, intellectual well-being, that sort of thing, at the top of the pyramid. This is a book that really, really intrigued me. So Daniel Pink, who wrote Drive, said actually he breaks it down into 3. So 3 different levels of motivation. So the basic level of motivation is the survival level, and this is a lot of where we were threatened. This is kind of 1, 2, 3 in Maslow's. This is a lot of where we were threatened through the pandemic. We went back into kind of survival mode. At mid-level level, where Maslow talks about it in terms of esteem, Pink talks about it in terms of like rewards and punishments. So you might think of the carrot and the stick, or things that we want, or results of doing good things, like salaries, bonuses, congratulations, recognition, awards, that sort of thing is an external reward. And the punishment might be the threat of leaving a job, the threat of being told off, that sort of thing. The top level of motivation, this was the one that I think is so interesting. This is where we all want to be, right? Is intrinsic motivation. And so rather than rewards and punishments being extrinsic, when we're intrinsically motivated, it's coming from within us. Coming from within. This is why we do things like our hobbies. It's why we do things like caring for parents. It's self-driven, self-motivated. It's the highest order. And so what Pink argues in his 2011 book, which is interesting, is very relevant now, is that there's a breakdown of that fourth level, or his second level of motivation 2.0, and what Maslow talks about in terms of esteem. It's that carrot and stick reward system, the extrinsic reward systems that once were very, very important in terms of, driving, a really key driver as to why we do things, are now actually failing in terms of their effectiveness. So in my words, the carrot's grown sour and the sticks become soft. And I'm certainly seeing this in the conversations I'm having. People who were previously very motivated by the things like promotions or are now suddenly finding themselves less interested in them. Not everyone, but certainly less motivated by them. Our priorities have rebalanced, and we've become more aware of taking more priority in some of the lower down needs when they went away, like the love and belonging, like spending time with family. It's increased in terms of importance, and we're seeking more of that top spot, personal growth, the intrinsic motivation. So the carrot's going sour, for instance, the allure of the promotion or the pay rise, although we all want to be paid more, right? But also the sticks become softer. So the threat of losing our jobs, as an example, for many, not all, there's certainly a lot that's going on as we enter the recession around redundancies and stuff, so I don't want to belittle that. But with the market being as it is, the threat for many of losing their job has massively lessened, and because there's a sense of people being able to find something else fairly easily. So many are ignoring the carrot and avoiding a stick and leaving quietly and loudly. One of the key drivers in that has been around the reordering of our personal priorities, but also it's given us a sense of agency and optimism. So I'm going to talk about a little bit more about agency and optimism. So question 3, are you up for the challenge of exploring a different way to motivate yourself and your team? So I'm going to go with yes. The real challenge is to drive agency and optimism. As I said, we're going to dive into here. I'm going to make this big so you can see it. So there's two aspects, and you see in this quadrant diagram here. You've got agency, and by agency I mean the feeling of the ability that I can influence the situation where I am. So when you have high agency, you believe that you're going to be able to influence the situation where you are. And if you've got low agency, you don't. On the other axis, you've got optimism. So if you're highly optimistic, you believe that things are going to get better. So what I'm saying as part of what we're seeing is that we're no longer prepared to be the prisoner. And a prisoner is not necessarily a new concept, it's definitely not a new concept. But when we feel like a prisoner, we don't believe that things are going to get better where they currently are. And we don't believe that we can influence things where we are. That's the agency component. And we don't think things are going to get better. That's the optimism component. So bottom right hand corner is that prisoner. What we're seeing with the Great Resignation is the shift to the right. I'm going to make you see it. So when the prisoner believes that their current situation could get better, so they have optimism that their situation could improve, but they don't believe that they can influence the situation where they are, they might attempt the Great Escape. And this is what we're seeing a lot of, with people who are dissatisfied or disenfranchised or frustrated where they are seeing other opportunities elsewhere, and therefore are acting with their feet. They are physically leaving, they are escaping. The other thing that we are seeing, the other direction, is where people feel like they have agency to influence their situation where they are, but they don't have optimism of things getting better. We're seeing action, for instance, quiet quitting. So quiet quitting for me is, if you're familiar with it, it's a survival-based act of agency. And by that I mean people are taking agency to do what they can to survive the situation. This isn't all quiet quitting because there's two different types. I'm not going to go into those two different types. Again, really interestingly covered in the Dare to Lead podcast with Brené Brown, Simon Sinek, and Adam Grant, part 2. they cover the 2 different types of quiet quitting. Fascinating episode, highly recommend listening to it. What I'm talking about here, though, is the type of quiet quitting where people are feeling like they're just not willing to go above and beyond anymore, are setting boundaries, which is good, but this is a low, they're not optimistic. They're not setting boundaries because they're optimistic about, they think that the boundary is going to be better. That would be in this kind of other quadrant, which I'm yet to talk about. This is where they're like, I'm just going to have to protect myself here and do less, give less, because that's what I can do to survive this situation. The box that we ideally want to support people into is the 3rd box, the top box, or the 4th box, the innovator box. This is where you both have, or individuals both have agency. They believe that they can impact or have influence on the situation where they are, and optimism that things will get better. I might share a quick personal example of where I've experienced all 4 of these boxes. I'm not so brilliant at the quiet quitting piece because I'm the sort that always gives 110% if they're going to do something. But I certainly have felt the prisoner, and I certainly have attempted the Great Escape or thought about the Great Escape, and I have definitely become the innovator. The example that I would give, and absolutely I share this with no reflection on the organization, because it's not really about the organization, it was about my experience in it at that time. But when I left the UK and moved to Australia, the company that brought me over there, it was a relocation package, right? So they paid for everything, sorted me out to make the move to a country that I knew no one, I'd never been to, and I was completely on my own. And when I arrived, my first 6 months were really tough. I was in a very different work environment to the one that I had previously been in. I had previously been working in a very people-oriented organization that was very, very kind of a 9 to 5, like encouraged you not to do anything more than that. And I shifted into one where we started by latest 7 a.m. and I was often finishing at 9 p.m. And working weekends. And at the time, I was experiencing really, really, really tough mental health challenges. That's not in relation to what was going on, but I was in it. I was in a deep period of depression. And I felt so the prisoner, because when I was brought over on that package, there was a clause in the contract that said, if you leave before X amount of time, then you have to pay everything back. And so for me, the Great Escape was just not an option. And as I explained earlier, I attempted the quiet quit. I attempted to kind of pull back and do less. I couldn't. And I got to a point, sort of breaking point, where I remember just going to my boss and just saying, I can't cope here. I can't cope unless things change. And this is where I was shifting into that innovator piece. I really thought about what are the things that could help me make this experience okay, this experience, endurable. And I came to him with some of those solutions. What previously had worked for me was going to the yoga in the morning. Well, when I was working in that organization, I couldn't, because we had to be in by 7. And the first yoga class was at 6. It would have finished at 7, and I couldn't have made, how the timing didn't work. So I went to him and said, well, in order for me to show up at my best at work, this is all pre-pandemic, and I think things have changed quite a lot, but in order for me to show up at work, I need to go to yoga first thing, which is going to mean the earliest I can get in is probably, I can get in by 7:30, but it's going to completely impact, like positively impact the way that I'm going to show up, and I'm going to do so much, better, and I'm going to be able to actually sustain this. Would you be able to accept or get on board with me arriving a bit later? What do you think his answer was going to be? Of course, yes, Chloe, that sounds like a great idea. Do it. I said, well, the other thing that's going to really help me is I'm an introvert, and I'm a strategic thinker, and with just so many people coming up to my desk and things coming up and flying, I'm just overwhelmed by do. I need time to think and be more strategic here outside of it. And what would really help me would be once a fortnight to work from home. Again, this is a while back. Could that be something that we could explore? What do you think he's going to say? Yes, of course, that could be something that we can explore. And the other thing I said was, sometimes I don't feel like I'm able to push back on certain things. How do you feel about being my guide? Being, if I need to say no to certain things, helping me push back on those things in order to make what we've prioritized the number one thing that I focus on. Would you be able to support me there? Yes. All of that, examples, same situation, but were ideas that I had created to shift myself out of a state that for me was unsustainable. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about becoming the innovator. Supporting people to shift into that top box where they feel like they can influence the situation where they are, and where they feel like there's optimism in the future. Okay. We're running short on time, so I'm going to speed this up. There's other examples of where people have been the innovator. Nelson Mandela is an amazing example of someone who experienced 27 years in prison. Actually, I imagine, and I haven't had the opportunity to ask him that, nor do I want to put words into his mouth, nor can I anymore, but I don't think that he would have described himself as the prisoner, even though he was a physical prisoner. He wrote in secret. He was living in a tiny, tiny cell for a very large part of his prison sentence, without ability to contact any others. He managed to write his autobiography, sneaking it out of the prison in kind of bits. Goodness knows how he actually went about doing that. And in fact, he once got caught, and there was 4 years where he was essentially punished for 4 years because some of the guards found him, speaking these things out. That's his innovation. That's him not, he couldn't escape. I don't know what the quit would have been. Possibly that was an option, but he chose to innovate. The other example is around Steve Jobs. We're all familiar with Steve Jobs' exit, or when he was fired from his own company, and how he started Next, and how Next then actually ended up being bought back by Apple, with him then coming back to take on the CEO role again. He didn't sit in the prisoner role, he shifted into the innovator, and this is what we want to help support our people to do. And what all of that comes from what Daniel Pink describes as that intrinsic motivation. Not because of the rewards and punishments, that motivation 2.0, it's because of what it means for us. So are you up for helping your people develop intrinsic motivation? Become like Mandela. So here are a couple of the solutions that I reckon are going to support your people. So there's two that I'm going to talk to. The first is around empowering the innovators, empowering people to shift up into that top right-hand box. This is around helping your leaders become leaders. This is by focusing less on sweetening the carrot and working out a new revised compensation plan, for example, and more empowering your people to grow their own, to develop intrinsic motivation, give them autonomy to be able to do that, and enhance agency and both agency and optimism by supporting them in building their intrinsic motivation. Again, there will be a lot of people within your organization, not necessarily the ones that you're expecting, who are feeling a prisoner. And there's nothing, it's not very fun for them either. They're not going to be performing at their best either, just as I wasn't. At some point, it becomes unsustainable and you shift, right? How can you support them into creating that shift, something that supports them and shifts, makes progress and shifts the business and the results forward too. The second is around fostering happy, high-performing teams that thrive. So creating thriving cultures that no one wants to leave. And this is about supporting the managers to help every single member of their team thrive. Every single person within each of the teams are going to be in their own experience, right? What motivates them as individuals will look different. Makes it a really hard task for team leaders to be able to support individuals to thrive on their own terms. But it is critical. Again, the sustainable motivation, the one that will last, the one that will keep them motivated, is if it comes within. So how do we help foster that? This is what we're talking about. The sustainable solution is to foster happy teams with motivated leaders, and businesses who will do that will thrive in the long term. They are the ones who will succeed through what is coming up, what we're going through or about to go through. So the question number 5 is whether or not you would like some support on this. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that I go about doing that through some of the programs that I offer. So one is around teams and really focused around teams. And this is around creating cultures of fulfillment in which every single person can thrive. And teams look different. Individuals within teams look different. So these programs are built through a real understanding of what drives intrinsic motivation to enable the team leaders and the teams to tap into the 3 drivers of intrinsic motivation, which are mastery, purpose, and autonomy. And Daniel Pink talks about that in his book. And for me, I talk about it within POP, we talk about it in terms of performance, purpose, and well-being. And how they match is performance is around what Pink talks about in terms of mastery. Purpose, well, it's the same word across both of us, but purpose and meaning, essentially, and connection. And the third element is around autonomy through well-being. So what I support teams with is creating programs that are aligned with what they specifically need, built under those 3 pillars. And how I support leaders is through, well, I'm running an upcoming Leaders Academy, High Performing Leaders Academy, but I also support leaders on a one-on-one basis too, developing intrinsic motivation. Remember that stat about the 85% versus the 0% who have actually left. It's because they've been developing intrinsic motivation. They were looking externally for things to solve for, just as I was, and just as I was contemplating leaving that organization or dreaming about leaving that organization. Instead, I was able to find solutions that enabled me to innovate, to find ways that not only enabled me to just survive, but actually thrive within that organization. I won't go into talking about some of the other things that I did above and beyond just asking my manager for a later start and support around pushing back or working from home. But when I was able to do that, it enabled access for me to tap into some of the things that drove me purpose. For instance, hosting TED Talk Thursdays, where a group of us will get together every single Thursday to discuss, to review and learn on a TED Talk and discuss our findings from it, or to share my own mental health journey with 150 people on my team. I was thinking, well, how can I influence the culture where I am? That was intrinsically motivated once I was able to shift out of that prisoner state, the safety. So my mission and our mission at POP is to help people thrive through unlocking intrinsic motivation, because happy people, intrinsically motivated people are happy, and happy people achieve more sales from a business objective. They take less sick leave. They're much more profitable, 21% more profitable, and 34% less likely to leave. They're also much more likely to recommend where they work to a friend or someone else. So it's been a little bit of a whistle-stop tour. There's so much more that we can dive in here, and I would also recommend to download the paper if you found it useful. Please do leave a comment, share with someone else if you found that this session has added value to you or helped you see the world in a slightly different lens and shift beyond this narrative that it's just about the money. It is never just about the money. But I'd ask you or invite you to reflect on what for you has been the biggest insights from today's session. And because there was no point in spending 60 minutes with me today over your lunch break, or if you're watching this back on replay, even if you're watching it at a higher speed, what's the one action that you're going to take from today to make this 60 minutes or less feel really well spent? And it could be to book in a time with me and let's have this conversation and see how I can support you or your team, you and your team, thrive, not survive. Tap into that intrinsic motivation. Or it might be downloading the paper. What is that one action that you're going to take away to make sure that this time was best spent for you? And this is how you can get in contact with me. I will make it a little bit bigger so you can actually see it, but I'm very heavily active on LinkedIn, where I imagine you might be watching this from. But feel free to get in contact. I would love to have a conversation around this topic. I spent the last 3 months really diving into it to understand it, all the conversations that I've had. I truly believe that together we're going to be able to create a world where people feel fulfilled within wherever or whatever they are doing. So thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been a pleasure. Please feel free to leave a comment below as to what you found most useful. I'd love to hear from you. Bye.